All right, so welcome to our session on ethical leadership. My name is John Haidt. I'm a social psychologist. I'm a professor at New York University Stern School of Business. I study morality and politics. And my official title there is the Thomas Cooley Professor of Ethical Leadership. So I profess ethical leadership. Now, I'm a professor. I've never actually led anything larger than a class discussion. And that's why I am the interviewer, and Jacqueline Novogratz is the interviewee for today. Jacqueline got her MBA from Stanford. She then worked at Chase Manhattan Bank as an international credit consultant. She worked for the World Bank and UNICEF in Africa. While she was in Africa, she applied her business and banking skills to create one of the first microfinance initiatives in Rwanda. Doing this work in Africa on the borderline of finance and NGOs gave her a really big idea. At least, I don't know if that's when you got the idea, but I'm just telling a story, weaving it all together. It seems to me that in that time of your life, the idea for what became patient capital was born. And this, as I understand it, is the idea that money can be invested in ways that may not provide a quick return on capital. They may not provide the best return on capital. But money can be invested in ways that serve the poor, in businesses that serve the poor and employ the poor, in ways that can be much more impactful than direct philanthropy. And when you invest in companies and you grow companies in situ, when you grow companies in developing countries, you end up having this amazingly positive transformative effect on the whole country. This idea led Jacqueline to create the Acumen Fund, which is a nonprofit global venture capital fund. All correct so far?
All correct.
Okay.
Fantastic.
Okay. Patient capital and Acumen were such big ideas and such good ideas that they got Jacqueline named to Foreign Policy's list of the top 100 global thinkers. She's been on the cover of Forbes. And just getting to know her and her work was amazingly transformative in my own discovery of business. I moved from the psychology department at UVA to the business school at Stern in 2011. I knew very little about business. And here it was Occupy Wall Street had just broken out, and capitalism, there was so much bad to say about it. And during this year when I was first learning about capitalism and business, and I really got to know Jacqueline then, if you ever want your faith restored, that business can be amazingly good and transformative for all the problems, the most serious problems you think in this world, just get to know Jacqueline. So Jacqueline also is well known for having a New York Times bestseller, The Blue Sweater, Bridging the Gap Between Rich and Poor in an Interconnected World. So welcome everyone, let's get started. Our goal today is to explore ethical leadership. And a way that I think about this is that we live in a time of declining trust in institutions. And this is happening all over the world. It's happening certainly in America, in Europe, and I was just in a number of Asian countries, especially the democracies, are having all kinds of problems, declining trust in leaders. In America, we certainly have seen scandals and enormous disappointments in the last decade or two in our political leaders, business leaders, religious leaders, the military, in so many walks of life. We're seeing failures that make young people cynical. And here at Aspen, we're also interested in thinking about the biggest problems and addressing them, but how can we do that when our institutions are less trusted and therefore less effective? Now, leadership is not the only thing that leads to this decline in trust. There are many other factors going on. We might talk about those at the end. But certainly, good leadership can make an enormous difference. Good leadership can turn things around and can make institutions work as they're supposed to, work for the benefit of many or all. So let's talk about ethical leadership. What is it? How can we encourage more of it? How can we teach young people to be better leaders? And I'm going to ask Jacqueline about there'll be sort of three parts to our conversation. So the first is directly about ethical leaders. What does it mean to be an ethical leader? What are the ethics we're talking about here? But I'm a social psychologist, and that means that we don't think that good things happen because of good people and bad things because of bad people. We think about systems and contexts and culture and environment. So in the second part, we'll talk about the role of culture and context. How do you design contexts or companies within which ethical leadership can be effective and can flourish? And then lastly, we'll talk about more sort of large-scale or global or just cultural trends that might make ethical leadership harder or easier going forward. So here's my first question for Jacqueline. So sort of straightforward. What exactly is an ethical leader, and why is ethics important for leadership? But here's the twist. I want you to answer that question, not in generalities, but by tell us a story about one of your companies. Tell us a story about one of the Acumen companies where ethical leadership has been crucial or is a great exemplar.
Okay, thanks. It's a great honor, as you can imagine, for me to consider John a friend and a mentor and then certainly an advisor. So thanks for being here, John. Just quickly, so that you all understand what we do, as John said, we're a nonprofit venture capital. We've invested about $88 million. That's mostly philanthropy that we turn around, and we take long-term bets on ethical entrepreneurs in the developing world that are looking to disrupt systems to serve the poor more effectively than either government or markets. And so the example I will use is one I didn't think we would be investing in the first place, although to be honest, when we started looking at the 5 basic services, healthcare, education, housing, alternative energy, agriculture, I was somewhat naive in not fully understanding just how corrupt and unethical these markets can be. And in fact, I would call them more political economies than market economies because everybody has their hands in the game. One of my favorite examples is the ambulance industry in India. Back in 2006, 90% of people who were in ambulances in India were dead, which was not that different from the situation in the United States in the 1960s. You called an ambulance only really to take your loved one to the morgue, and then you had to pay a bribe for the honor. Very broken, very corrupt, multi-billion-dollar industry, all driven by government tender to private sector companies, often who had no ambulances. At the time, Bombay, had 70 working ambulances for 17 million people. So when we were approached by this guy, Shafi Mathur, and his partner, Swetam Mangal, they had a company with 9 ambulances, which felt quite quixotic to us. But this guy was like a bull in a china shop, and it was so clear that part of his drive was to change not only what was happening, but how it was happening. And he was really committed to moral leadership. Bless you. The very well trained. The first, so we bought a third of his company, not knowing where this would go. The first thing that happened was he couldn't get a number without paying a bribe. So you would think
phone number.
111, 911, something people can remember in a panic. Without a bribe, he got 1298. So we had to put a whole marketing campaign together, but the guy was insistent. And then he was clear that he was going to provide a service where you didn't have to pay bribes. And when the terrorist attacks happened, not only was this the only ambulance service in 2010 to show up to the burning buildings in Mumbai, I don't know if you remember this, but his workers, even though they didn't have flak jackets, already had integrated into them this sense that this was their duty. And so they really saved hundreds of people that day. That was the beginning of us moving from a private sector company, which was hard enough to deal with ethically, to a public-private partnership. And then we learned all of the next pieces and why patient capital was so important. One, just getting tender was very, very difficult. And so how do you get more canny, which goes to flexibility, and yet not play the corruption game? 2, could we start to use marketing that this was not corrupt and there would be no bribes as a part of it? And 3, these guys were great managers. And it was that combination of what we would call moral leadership and great management that has turned into a company that today employs almost 7,000 people, runs 1,200 ambulances. They essentially serve half of India's population. They're the second largest ambulance company in the world, in Asia. And what was fascinating to me through this whole experience is that he was able to take moral leadership and move it into the company, not only because he has systems, like you're talking about, of goodness, but it's a call center. And so every time somebody is taken to hospital, they are asked, Did you pay a bribe? Were you asked to pay a bribe? And what was the quality of your service? And so
Great. So
we've
you've got
seen
feedback
this.
systems, accountability ratings.
So you've got not just love, but accountability.
Right.
And
Right.
I think it's a real model for, frankly, full disruption in a sector that the patient capital allowed them to do what was right, not what was easy, take the hard path, and yet bring the efficiency of the marketplace to delivering a public good.
No, that's great. Right. What a great example of disrupting a miserable industry that's transporting corpses for bribes. I mean, it's just horrible to think about. So it's a beautiful story. How do you so you vet all these companies, you decide which ones to invest in. Are you drawn to the sort of the ethics of the idea, like, oh, this is something the poor really need? Or how do you actually size up the person? How do you size up the person pitching you?
I think, John, when we were young as an organization, just like as a person is young often, we got really excited by ideas. And so we would back an idea without spending enough time looking at the moral fiber of the leader. And that has flipped. Now, give me a fairly mediocre idea and a great leader, and I'm much more likely to invest than a fantastic idea.
But how do you do that? Like, do you ask about his reputation? Like, how do you actually vet somebody?
We ask about, now we have organizations on the grounds in all the countries in which we operate, and so we use our networks to vet his reputation or her reputation. We spend time with them, real time, talking to them about who they are ethically, how do they run their organization. We talk to other people in their organization, not just them, so that we get a real sense. Some of the mistakes that we've made have been healthcare, which is really tough. Healthcare entrepreneur that wants to work with the middle class in India and then says, but I really want to work with Acumen because you care about the poor, so I'm going to go downstream. And
I mean, like, just to get money from you?
Just to get money for you. And they see that there's a real opportunity, but they're not really committed to working with the poor. And as soon as the going gets tough, they're out of there. But they see us as easy. We tell them, we're patient capital, we're not stupid capital. And so again, it's this hard and soft that we have to confront. So if there's an ease of telling us what they're going to do and they haven't done the hard work of actually doing it, we no longer yearn to believe and then follow up. We ask for proof that you've done the work.
Got it. Okay, so let's talk about what are the ethics of ethical leadership. There's so much talk, each person has to find their own, what are your own moral values? I don't want to impose my values on you. If we talk about an ethical leader, is there an ethics that goes along with being a leader such that anybody in a leadership position, we can say what those ethics are? Or is this a matter of each person has to have their own ethics and be principled and take that into the job?
I think it's both. We are living in a moment of history that I think it feels so fragmented, so fast, and there are such distractions that we have rules, but we also need a moral compass. And you talked about the whole Wall Street movement and
the
Occupy Wall Street movement. And I remember 2008. I was on Stanford's advisory. We had a real conversation inside because so many of the guys on Wall Street, when questioned about what happened, said, look, I did everything within the letter of the law. And yet, they didn't do what was right. And that, I think, is where we started to lose that trust. You could imagine things going faster and faster and people saying, well, if I don't do it, someone else is going to do it. And so, in some cases, it is about your moral compass. In other cases, it's about the law. And with the fragmentation, I just think it gets much more difficult to navigate than before. And as the millennials want to move from as we must move from a shareholder-only model. And when I went to business school, that was our ethics class.
That was explicitly taught.
That was explicitly. That is your ethical and fiduciary responsibility. That has shifted in 20 years to a stakeholder model of how we operate our businesses. And when it comes to the poor, that gets even more complicated. And so you've got to really have a moral compass around who these stakeholders are, and yet you also have laws that can help you buttress the sides.
Now, does this vary a lot by industry? I mean, companies that are serving consumers that have a reputation to guard, they develop relationships with consumers. It seems that ethics is it's part of the brand. But a lot of the problems we all talk about are in finance. Is the financial world different from other industries?
I think the financial world is faster. There's more gray. But I think when you were talking before about the consumer industries, I think there's not only more transparency, but young people who want to work in those industries are insisting on greater transparency. And that entails supply chains that go down to smallholder farmers. They want to know, where is that coffee grown? How is that coffee grown? And so they're being pushed from the outside and from the inside simultaneously. In the financial arena, there's still a lot of pressure. Just do it. Make money the way that you can make money. And then I still would love to have some social good as well. And the whole impact investing movement is starting to push that. But it's still, I think it's going to be slower to catch up.
Right.
But I don't think this is dirtier, and that is,
okay. Oh, good. That's good to hear. So as you often say, do what's right, do what's hard,
do what's right, not what's easy.
Do what's right, not what's easy. Give us some examples of where, it's great to say it, it's easy to say it. I can say it, actually no, I guess I failed the first time I tried to say it. Give us some examples of where it was really hard or where it even backfired. In other words, so actually this morning in my talk here, I showed the Transparency International map. The whole world is bright red, which means high corruption, except for a few regions of the world are yellow, low corruption. And I made a comment that in these red countries, in these corrupt countries, ethics is a liability. Ethics can block you from being successful. But as I was saying it, I was sort of thinking, I actually better check that with Jacqueline. What do you think? Do you think that because you worked in a lot of countries that are, every country you work in is bright red on that map. Is ethics sometimes a liability? Be honest.
I don't think ethics is a liability. I think that that purity is a liability, and I don't want to be misunderstood to say that's her way of escaping. But ethics is a really big word, and so some of the places that we as an organization and I as a leader have tried to do what's right, not what's easy, would be a company where we found pretty egregious ethical digressions and made a decision to exit. In this one particular company, the social impact was quite powerful. And by exiting, where we already are playing in a space where Acumen focuses on the very poor and we're nonprofit, people say, well, that's really great, but are you really tough investors? By exiting and taking a haircut, we now present ourselves to the world as easier, less tough. And yet, and on the social impact, we also take a hit. And yet, we've got 300 fellows, 5,000 chapter members, 175,000 people taking our online courses. I have to stand up in front of them. I believe that corruption hurts the poor more than it hurts the rich, and that long term, we did what was right, and we took a hit. In other cases, it's easier for me to live in the gray. We've gotten hammered by our own community and by others for, we have 2 chapters in Saudi Arabia, Jeddah and Riyadh, and some women's rights advocates have said, how can you be supporting these young people in Saudi Arabia when Saudi Arabia is so terrible toward women? That's a really easy ethical decision for me. We partner with big corporations. How can you take money from some of those big corporations? I believe you've got to be in the game to change the game. We have a feudal, yet we have a commercial bank in feudal Pakistan, where you've got some of the toughest conditions in the world, just the center for extremist madrasas. And we were exploring building an end-to-end sugar company. And one of our partners was like, so you're just going to destroy health by working at feudal with sugar.
Sugar is so bad. Oh, I see.
And I was like, that's an easy. So I believe that there's gray, and I believe that sometimes we cut off our nose to spite our face, but this goes back to the compass. But I also believe there's black and white. And knowing the difference is, I think, the kind of moral leadership we need to do our best to stand up for.
Okay. So you work mostly in Africa and South Asia. Those are where most of your companies
Now
are.
Latin America.
And now Latin America. Are there cultural differences in leadership style? Have you had to adapt, your model of how a company should be run, what the CEO should be doing? Have you had to adapt to regional differences?
I would say there's Eastern and Western differences, and we've adapted, and our entrepreneurs have adapted.
Hey, tell us some.
Probably the biggest is, and it's changing with the next generation, is hierarchy and order are more, hierarchy, order, honor, and shame, I think probably are values that exist in strong doses in the countries in which we operate. And so when I first started Acumen, you would walk into some of our companies and everybody would stand up, all the underlings. That doesn't really happen very much anymore, particularly with the young entrepreneurs. And sometimes entrepreneurs wouldn't tell you what was happening until it was too late to do anything about it.
It's often hard to bring bad news or to say no.
It's too hard to give bad news. And I think that's a culture that we're really trying to shift so that we can actually help solve the problems. Same with on corruption. Our best entrepreneurs, whether they're Pakistani or Ethiopian, will now say, I found corruption, speed money's being paid way down in my supply chain. Can you actually help us think about how we start to shift the culture inside the company?
Okay.
Just a much healthier conversation than what we've had in the past.
Okay. And what about gender? Are there, so we've been talking mostly about leadership ethical leadership in developing countries that have corruption. Let's bring it back to the US to some extent and say, what have you learned about ethical leadership that might be either different from men or women, or styles of successful ethical leaders of the two genders?
I think that women tend to doubt themselves more, both in a healthier way and sometimes in an unhealthy way. And so a lack of certainty about everything sometimes allows them to live more in the gray in a way that they listen and will tell you what's happening faster. One of our women leaders in Pakistan, who is amazing, this is how deep it can go, ran a microfinance bank. And during the debt crisis of 2008, where you had ripple effects globally, a local minister, as his way of helping his people, offered them, for a fee, little certificates that would enable them to not have to repay their bank loans. And within 4 months, we saw a bank that had run at 99% repayment rates go to 30% repayment rates. If that weren't enough, then they started circulating rumors that the founder was dead. And so we had to work with her to put her on television, get Muhammad Yunus to write letters, put it in the newspaper, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it was her willingness, as it was happening, to call us. We went into the branches, we worked with them, we were on the streets trying to reconstruct that bank as fast as we possibly could. And I don't know if a man would have come in so quickly to let us know exactly what was happening so that we could actually go and work with her.
Okay. Okay. This might be a good segue into. Oh no! Wait. Before we get there, I just want to. Well, let's see. Okay. Two terms I've heard you use a lot that I don't usually hear in leadership literature: dignity and compassion. Right? Because Jacqueline's spoken at Stern before to my students, and she speaks in a way that's feels unusual and more humane compared to what you often hear in business school classes. What do dignity and compassion, what do those have to do with leadership?
I think they have everything to do with leadership. We talk a lot about compassion and courage, first of all. That one of my favorite quotes from Martin Luther King is that love without power is anemic and sentimental, and that power with love is reckless and abusive. And that the kind of leaders we need, especially today in such an unequal world, are those that have the courage to walk with love and power. And in many ways, the capitalist system is really good at the power side, on the efficiency side. And we too often overlook the poor. And if we want to find ways to integrate them, we've got to be focused on looking not only at metrics that tell us what GDP is or what profits are, but are we actually increasing choice? Are we increasing opportunity? And that for us is dignity. And so for us, it's this constant movement back. So when we construct our fellows program, which is really about moral leadership, it's really focused on these two sides: financial skills, operational skills, because you've got to be able to manage yourself, not just out of a shoebox, but we want you to reach millions, and moral imagination. Can you actually design solutions from the perspective of the people that you are serving, rather than from the certainty of what you think you need?
I see. So it's just better business to be able to be compassionate, perspective-taking, listen to the people you're trying to serve.
Yeah. I actually have a story that to illustrate that. We invested in a company called D-Light when solar was at $4 a watt. Nobody had solar products among the poor. It, again, took 9 years. But about 6 years into it, maybe 7 years into it, they were really starting to sell. Now, mind you, this is a company that now has an 80% brand awareness across Kenya. 30% of all Kenyan homes have D-Lights, and they've brought light to 50 million people. So they know how to do love and power. But I had gone to see one of the customers, which is something I make a practice of doing, and her name was Teresia. She was a little tiny grandmother, and I went with this big Australian guy who was 30 years at Colgate-Palmolive, and he was now D-Light's Africa regional distributor from Australia, ironically named David Small, big shock of white hair. And I said to Teresia, as she's talking to this big guy, I said, tell me what you like about this light. And you know, the charity model, really easy. They tell you all the good things, and you walk out and nothing happens. And I said, now I want you to tell Mr. Small what you don't like about the light, how we can improve it. And she said, first, I would make sure that I could charge my cell phone, because it has a cell phone charge inside, at the same time that I charge my light. And I thought, well, that's great. And then she puts her hands on her hips, and she goes, second. And she proceeds to give him 4 ways to improve the light. And as she was standing there, looking up at him and talking to him with such power, I thought to myself, okay, this is what we mean by compassion, by dignity, because she is not pandering, she is not begging, she is speaking to him as a customer.
Oh, interesting.
And so he is not standing there with this false arrogance or certainty that he knows what's right for her, but he's trying to earn her trust. And it's in that kind of exchange that I think you have the chance for dignity.
So you're saying that a commercial relationship, I'm trying to sell you something, and I want your feedback as to how I can make a better product for you, that actually gives more dignity than a philanthropic relationship or the relationship that many nonprofits would have. Great. That's a nice thought.
But it requires the two.
Okay. So that's a nice. So now let's turn to the second part. We're sort of already getting there, but thinking about organizations. We talked about individual leaders and their values and how to lead. You're in the business of finding small companies and helping them grow big. How do you help them design their companies for ethics? How do you help them stay on the right path when there's so many temptations and pressures to go off? Let's talk about ethical culture and organizations.
Well, so often, as so many of you, everyone here knows, it's the tone from the top. And 10 years ago, we decided to create a fellows program, not only for young people around the world that were looking to start these kinds of companies, but also for employees and some of the entrepreneurs that we work with. And interestingly, I'm a trustee at the Aspen Institute and a Crown Fellow, so I actually did a lot of the Good Society readings. And we took the Good Society curriculum and we morphed it somewhat, although we still have some fundamental readings, and we teach this all around the world. When you read Plato and Aristotle and King with young Pakistani entrepreneurs that span the tribal north, where people live in cultures of honor killings and yet are desperate to do good, to Harvard and Oxford MBAs from the most elite families, and you put them in a room not only do they start learning about themselves and their own moral compasses, but they start to learn about each other in ways that many of them never talked to, if a Punjabi has never talked to a Pashtun before. And so there's this, it's the how again, that we still focus on the hard skills and we don't walk away from those. But it's this piece of, tell me why you are doing this. What is the purpose of your business? And we will help you build that. But don't divorce it.
But are you saying that you're taking these are the fellows or these are the entrepreneurs?
Both.
Okay. So you're saying you're taking people who might only have had exposure to their local culture and exposing them to a more universal business culture? Is that
universal business and universal moral culture? With the individual entrepreneurs, it has to start with picking the right ones. Because as I said before, we've picked the wrong ones. And I've called people before and said, look, we just saw a major violation of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. You're done. And I almost can feel a proverbial pat on the head. You just don't understand how business is done here. And it's like, I've actually worked in this region for 30 years. I do understand. This is a difference of opinion. That's going to be a harder change than some of particularly the younger entrepreneurs who are asking these questions, who are asking, is it more unethical to pay the bribe to register the land and get housing to the poor quick? Or is it more unethical to not pay the bribe and it takes an additional 12 months to register the land? What do you think I should do? And so I will have engaged in that conversation, our team will engage in that conversation, but by building a community of entrepreneurs, I'm hoping that they start asking each other, because they pay a price. Long term, is that price worth it?
So tell us about that particular situation in Pakistan. I think you talked about this when you were at Stern. It wasn't the choice of let it take another year. It was like, will it ever get built, right? I mean,
will it ever get built?
Will it ever get built? So when you take a firm stance, you say, no, we're not paying bribes. Does that sometimes change the officials? Do they give in?
Well, in this case, and this is where I think it's not only about thinking, because I started Acumen not to prove that you could make money in low-income markets, even though some of our companies do in big ways. I started Acumen because I wanted to find better ways to end poverty. And so we have different tools. We have our capital, we have our leaders, and we have our big mouths. And so while Javad, bless you again, was going through that, trying to get that land registered, anytime I was on a stage across Pakistan, I talked about the fact that he still hadn't gotten his land registered. And we ultimately got to the Deputy Minister of Housing in the Punjab, which is the largest state and the most important state in Pakistan. And they ended up helping him. And then there's now a unit inside that housing, so you can bypass the registrar and get that land registered a lot faster. Javad has now created the first and flagship low-income housing development for Pakistan. Importantly, and this is where moral leadership and the ins and outs of Islam, but this is a very diverse community. Not only Shias, Sunnis, but within Sunni Islam, which is where you're seeing a lot of the intersectoral violence, you've got many of the major sects. And so, whereas that violence is so rife right now across Pakistan, this community not only has had no violence, but the leaders of the community ultimately decided that they had one mosque, and who was going to use it to say Friday prayer? The Sunnis, the Shias, the Baghrabis, the Wahhabis, and they decided that they together would elect 3 imams from 3 different sects, and one imam would pray with the whole community together. So it's a microcosm of a story for 3,000 people, but you tell that story in a big audience, and everyone's crying because all of a sudden you are showing that we're better than we think we are. We can actually do this. Now, Homeless International has just given them a £15 million debt facility to take this model across the country. And so it's a longer path. It is a harder path.
Right.
But I look at Javad Aslam in Pakistan, and I think about what does he have to teach all of us about the end game.
About what?
The whole end game. Why are you doing this? And he's not only transformed individual lives, he is in the midst of transforming a system. And when I look at our fellows across Pakistan, and we now have 100 of them, they look at him as a moral leader and a hero. And we could do a better job celebrating those kinds of heroes in the business community, because he's also a businessman. And we have $1 million in equity riding on the success of this. Right. And I think we'll get a good return.
So, you're especially focused on young people. You've got the fellows. Are your entrepreneurs generally young, or are they all ages?
The successful entrepreneurs are probably 40. The most successful. It's changing in solar, where these, and in cell phone apps. Those things are, those are the millennials. The ones that are looking at big, ugly systems change, water, health, housing, in some ways I think they apprentice for 15 years, not only building the skills and understanding community, but building the networks that are required to make these kinds of companies work in these political sectors.
Right, so it takes a little more wisdom and experience to work your way through those complicated systems. Okay, but do you feel as though the job is getting easier? Do you feel as though, be it generational changes or governance changes or international pressure, I mean, are European, are companies, is the West getting better at not paying bribes? I mean, what's the trajectory here? Is it getting easier?
It's getting easier and it's getting harder. On the easy side, well, I'll do the harder first so I can end optimistically.
Okay, good.
The harder is, it's really hard with how fast wealth is being amassed by some people who are playing the bad ethics game. To sit there, and this is what our fellows talk to us about a lot, to sit there and watch their friends become exorbitantly wealthy, and they're out there slogging away, trying to do the hard work. And so what I spend a lot of my time thinking about is how we celebrate them, how we connect them, how we make them not so lonely. And that's the downside. The second part of the downside is the stakes are getting higher. Over the last 2 months, one of the workers in one of our fellows' companies was assassinated, trying to stop the child trafficking, using a business model for that. And another really brave young woman in our community, not a fellow nor an entrepreneur, but also deeply, deeply brave, was assassinated. And that really hits home the price that some of these young people are paying. On the optimistic side, and I'm much more optimistic than I am pessimistic, cell phones, the internet, transparency is changing the game. We have a company started by a young Ghanaian in Nigeria, because in Nigeria 70% of all drugs are counterfeit, who has created an app called, the company's Sproxel. Big Pharma is their main customer. So on every unit of medicine that you buy, there's a blister seal. You scratch it off, you type the number that's on that unit you text it into your phone, and you know immediately whether that medicine is counterfeit or not. The game is starting to change. And because of our geographic distribution, and because there's counterfeit medicine in every one of our countries, that is now licensed in Pakistan, India, Kenya, Ghana, and we're moving it into other countries. Our lean data, which we used to look at impact metrics, where we would reach, our intrametric metrics used to be fairly blunt. We can now text 3,000, 5,000 customers of a company in one text and ask them a series of questions, like with the ambulances. We're not only learning data about who they are, how poor are they, what's happening to their income, but are people bribing you? Where do you fit on this system? So there is a transparency that is beginning through these systems, and these young people don't want this corruption. They're shamed by the corruption. And I feel that the millennials are going to push to end this. It will not be without some ugly fights, because there's a really strong status quo that has a vested interest in things not changing. And you know this more than anybody. But I look at them and I just can't believe how extraordinary they are and how much they have to teach us.
Well, that's extremely optimistic, that you've got a generational change in not just the desire for change, but the sense that they can do something about it, and then you've got the technology changing along with them. It's a great example, Sproxel, is that what
Sproxel.
Sproxel, of a simple app that can disrupt a corrupt practice that's hurting people. So I want to end with maybe a bit more of a personal question about the pleasures and the pains or horrors of leadership. When I became a father, I discovered that I was fully prepared for all the downsides. I knew about the sleep, I knew about the difficulty, but I wasn't fully prepared for how much fun it was going to be. And so I want to ask you this question about being a leader. I don't imagine you set out to be a leader. You set out, you wanted to address poverty. And now you're on all kinds of shortlists for leadership positions, and you lead a large organization, and you're really having an effect on the world. And we're always supposed to say, you don't seek it, or but I actually want to know: is it surprisingly fun? Are there great pleasures to being a leader? What are the what's the best part about it, and what's the worst part?
The worst part is when you feel like you've really let people down, whether it's a company that has so much potential and has really failed a community of people that have nothing. And then having to go back and tell your team about it. But the upside is unbelievable. My husband, while we complain about email all the time, he's like, that's like a little love machine for you. And there's truth,
Well, so you mean email? You get
my
so much
email.
gratitude email.
I get so many, not gratitude so much, but this morning, just for an example, there's a young group of boys in the Nairobi slums that read my book, and they started the Blue Sweater book club. And they've been both doing business plan competitions in the slums, and they have started a series of TEDx's across 60 slums in Kenya, because they want the world to see that that people in the slums are graffiti artists and
talents.
And it's not just this desperately. So I get updates from them on a regular basis. There are two young consultants from Canada took our Lean Startup course online. They were really well paid. Their imagination was captured by what's happening out in the world. And they decided that they were going to build a early learning daycare center in the Nairobi slums. They raised money online, they quit their jobs, they moved to Nairobi, and I get updates from them of what they're doing. Benji Williams was a fellow of ours in Pakistan. He's an African-American, one of 9 kids, the only birth child, grew up in South Central LA. We put him in Pakistan, which was really brave of him at the time to go. And at the end of his tenure, he went to Stanford Business School. He graduated from Stanford Business School, and he sends me a note, and he says, I'm thinking of doing an education company, Jacqueline, vocational ed, and my partner's Indian, and we're trying to decide, should we do it in India or Pakistan? Now, Pakistan is not an easy place for Indians, and it's not a place for African Americans. And I said, you know what? Here's all the reasons that India is going to be easier for you. But you do what's in your heart, Benji. And I get an email from him, and he says, Dear Jay, we're doing what's right, not what's easy. We're going to Pakistan. I was like, oh no. And he has created this, essentially, the next iteration of Acumen, a vocational education company for tertiary level graduates of colleges, and he's getting them jobs, and he's teaching them to be moral leaders, and he's changing a pocket of this world, and he's being helped by all these other fellows. And my final one, I keep going back to Pakistan, it's just been on my mind because it's been in the news, but is a young guy named Wahad that is, if you can imagine, he looks like a toothpick with 2 eyes on the top, and he's always doing this. And if any of you know Seth Godin in marketing, he's kind of a Seth Godin Pakistani style. He grew up in a village. He went to a public school, a bad college that he dropped out of, but he's so creative and so curious, and he's connected to the internet. Somehow or another, he found us. Somehow or another, he made it into the Acumen Fellowship. And his dream is now to be the Zappos of Pakistan. He works with cobblers, local cobblers that make handmade shoes. And when he first started, he gave me a pair to give to my husband, who refused to wear them. And so I had to give him the bad news that they were beautiful, just not for New York City. And so this ecosystem of other fellows came to help him, because some of our fellows worked at Apple and Google, and they're designers. And they redesigned his shoes. They rebranded him. They helped him create a new website, and they did a Kickstarter campaign. Seth Godin, because this kid loves him, helped push it, and so did I. And he raised $115,000 on Kickstarter for these now beautiful handmade leather shoes. They cost like $200 each, more than any Pakistani's ever raised. There's a community around this young man who is always writing me to tell me he's doing what's right, not what's easy. And I have audacity and humility, and they're using this language. And you think, okay, there is this network of young people around the world, and if we can help them create a moral framework that allows for different religion, whether you're religious or skeptical or atheist or on the right or on the left, whatever ethnicity you come from, if they can see themselves in that framework, and as important, they can see each other, well, that gives us a lot of hope for where the future goes. And if that doesn't make you feel good, nothing's going to make you feel good.
Wonderful. I'm imagining someday if they were to do a sort of a, it's a wonderful life about you, and imagine taking you out and just seeing all the things that have happened that wouldn't have happened. So
well,
a
lot of it would have happened anyway, but I'm just number one cheerleader, like, come on, you know. Okay. But I just get to see talent in pockets of the world that that the world too often would rather not see.
Wonderful. Okay, let's open it up for questions. We have, I think, about 10 minutes. What's our time? Yeah. Okay. Any questions for Jacqueline?
Yes.
Do we need we have microphones coming around, so just hold up your hand if you're the questioner.
Hello. I know, because I heard you speak earlier this week, that you are beginning to imagine programs in the United States that can be funded with this same platform idea. How do you anticipate, or do you anticipate, dealing with what I think we all have to admit is greed and corruption in the United States, and especially as it affects the poor? That I feel, and I may be misjudging the situation, but I feel that very often the poor are the ones that are on the receiving end of a lot of bad behavior. So how do you start thinking about changing some of that and encouraging a culture of moral leadership in this country as it affects the poor?
In a way, and again, it's the different levels of acumen, because I'm such a believer that it's not just enough to have a model, you have to actually have a platform that allows that model to be seen. And there's also this incredible generation of young people, as we all know, in this country that want to do good, and they don't always know where the outlets are. And so, first of all, I think as a global organization just going into America is a statement that we are one world. We are no longer the developed world and the developing world, and that there's real poverty. And one of the things that was very distressing to me when we were first reaching out, and there were lots of questions, acumen has its hands full in the countries in which we operate, and we're good at it, and we know how to deal with absolute poverty. This is a very different situation. It's relative poverty. It's about policy and a different kind of corruption and greed, as you're talking about. And so we were listening to all of that when we started moving around the country and asking people. What was shocking was the number of people who said to us and to me, we love that you're working globally. We understand it. But let's face it, in the developing world, the poor are deserving. They work really hard. They have no money. But in the United States, they have televisions and air conditioners, and they're kind of not deserving. And so one, let's change that narrative, because that cannot be the narrative of this country. This has got to be the narrative of we are now part of a bigger world that we all have to play a role in. And we're seeing way too many of our young people marginalized to the point where they're not contributing. We can have a whole conversation that spans left and right around where are the institutional problems and where are the individual behavior problems and how does community bind that. And I actually think that's Acumen's strong point. So one, let's change the narrative, and that's why we're part of America. Two, there's so much to be learned from the rest of the world here, and there's so much to be learned in the rest of the world from here. And what's been fascinating is some of the first pipeline opportunities that we're seeing are borrowing models that they have found, whether they were Peace Corps volunteer or what have you, and they want to bring it back to this country. And the Jesuits talk a lot about accompaniment and how important accompaniment is in our lives. And a lot of African and South Asian models where that's more ingrained in a collective society use that just in the way they build business models. And so there's a couple of young people that are looking at a healthcare model where they can keep diabetic patients out of the emergency room by texting them every day, how are you feeling, have you taken your insulin shots, and when things are going awry, that's when the partner will come in. And they are getting such spectacular results that Obamacare now has a revenue model where they can reduce, you talk about stakeholders, they reduce their costs, you can create a for-profit model, the poor get healthier, and you've got a set of metrics that show the world that it doesn't have to be this way. We can actually do this better. One of our Indian entrepreneurs is mentoring these young people. And so you've got technology that allows this. So I'm starting to see, it's slow, just like it was slow there because we are so bifurcated. Here's the impact sector, and it's all about, I would call it the underserved. That's where you're seeing a lot of investment dollars. Let's hire our vets, which is fantastic. But you can make those companies profitable faster. Going into the poor, again, you're dealing with status quos that have vested interest in keeping things the way they are. It will take a longer time. It needs patient capital. But when I look at these young people and I look at the opportunities to think more creatively, I'm so excited to imagine what we're going to learn with Acumen America.
I think we might have time for one more question. Let's see. Who's got the
or maybe three, and I can try to answer one.
That's a good idea. Let's get these three questions here on the board.
Really enjoyed the panel so far. Thank you guys so much, both of you. I was wondering, based upon your previous experience with, moral leadership in your portfolio companies, I was wondering what opportunities you see in transferring some of those platforms to larger corporations, where it can sometimes be much harder to enforce those values.
Thanks.
Okay, great question. Pass the microphone forward. I think we're doing this fellow, and then there's one over here.
Yeah, I wondered how concerned you are with the sort of the symbolic nature of what you're doing. I mean, you talk a lot about Pakistan, but Pakistan is a failed state. To what extent is your sort of focus on the privatization of virtue? How do you see your role in terms of the context of the state to solve these enormous problems which small companies, I mean, like your fund, which, I mean, you only have, under $100 million. You're not able to deal with these huge social issues anywhere, whether it's the US or Pakistan.
And then, was there a question here? Yeah, okay. And then, so we'll just get those three. And then Jacqueline won't be able to address all three, but we'll see what she says. And then for others, I'm sorry, I can't just come up afterwards, and we'll talk afterward for everyone else who we couldn't call on.
Great. Well, just in your first example on the ambulance company, you said that he had, I believe, 9 ambulances. So was he already operating in the system, and was he taking bribes and had an epiphany and I want to change, and you helped him change? Or he was already operating ethically, but he couldn't scale up and you helped him do that?
He was operating ethically and he couldn't. This guy was a bull in a china shop with just a straight arrow compass. So he was the right partner for us. Both of your questions are somewhat linked because you're talking about scale and you're talking about the symbolic nature of what Acumen does. And so as I think about our next chapter, because I think your questions are right on point, it really is the recognition that we are good at, we're almost a laboratory for identifying innovation that can start to reach, well, in some cases, 50, 60 million people. In the case of ambulances, many more than that. But you're still not changing systems, except ambulances, which is in some ways a one-off. I think our next chapter is that crossroads of patient capital, government, and civil society. When I look at the solar industry that started with this first investment in D-Light, we've now started to see many, many other private companies piggyback to really move the needle and accelerate. If we care about poverty and climate change, we've got to go fast enough to get governments to stop going for coal and other fossil fuels. And I think that, and I know that that will only happen if you partner with the right governments. So that's a whole other conversation. We are now partnering with Unilever and other major corporations that are looking at their supply chains. Much of the pressure is coming internally from their employees as well as their customers, but even more so, I think, their employees. People say, well, Unilever, Paul Pullman, he's such a moral leader, he's in his own category. I think by being in that category, there are many other corporate leaders that are moving into the category. And so one of the joys of my job is that I don't only get to work with slum dwellers and amazing entrepreneurs, but increasingly corporate leaders that want to find ways to partner, use our fellows' courses, and are having these same conversations. How do I change culture in my company? And they've got a lot more to deal with than we do. In Pakistan, I really believe, and same with Kenya, we are not here for a 5 or 10-year play. And in 30 years, when there are 1,000 young leaders that we have been supporting for 30 years, you're going to see much more systemic change.
Okay. That's a great way to end, with the importance of patience, patient capital, along with humility, social sensitivity, and systems thinking. I hope you all take away a better, more nuanced understanding of the power and importance and complexity of ethical leadership. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jacqueline.